Well, hello there, and welcome to another edition of Warbird Wednesday. My name is Fred Bell, the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. And you know, last week we were talking about the F-16, which we call the big dog of more modern strategic fighters. And this week we're moving on to a lightweight fighter, but equally as important in the United States arsenal, the F-16, the General Dynamics, the Fighting Falcon. But first, I will have to look at my hat that my unpropitious assistant got me today. Greg, of course, is getting me these fun hats, and today I am the hot pepper. Although Easter is coming, Greg, I do not understand the relationship there, but I'm going to go ahead and remove my hot pepper hat that Greg has for me. We're going to toss this off camera. Oh, another excellent catch by the Kenny. So today what we're doing is we're talking about the F-16, the Fighting Falcon. Now the interesting thing about the F-16 is the Air Force, remember we were talking about that X program, the Generation X program in the Air Force last week with the TFX aircraft that really were the swing wing versions, the F-111 and the F-14. Ultimately, the thinking around that led to the F-15. In this case, the Air Force FX program people were hostile. They were working on the F-15 because they felt that the F-16 was a conflict or in competition for that more heavyweight F-15. Now, the first flight of this aircraft was in 1974. It was introduced into the arsenal in 1978. There have been 4,604 of this aircraft built. It also led to the F-16XL, which was the Delta Wing, a full Delta Wing aircraft, and the Mitsubishi F-2. The aircraft is produced, and for you aficionados, produced in a number of variants. As we usually do, we're not going to get into variants. We're going to talk about the type in a broad brush sense. And so I'm going to reach over and I'm going to grab, look at that, Greg. That was like right off the spindle. You are teaching me so well how to handle these models. By the way, another really nice model, that F-15. This is equally as nice for you airplane aficionados out there. This is very nice. Now this is an F-16F. We're going to talk about block versions of the airplane. Block versions of the airplane, think about it this way, and for a lot of people that know modern fighters, you know what block means, but for those that don't, there can be variants of an aircraft, but the block refers to, and there's a number to it, refers to the group of airplanes built. And depending on the block number and when they're built, there can be all kinds of upgrades made to the airframe in different block numbers. And they can be radically different from the beginning when the airplane is produced to when the last airplane rolls off the assembly line. We'll talk about that with this airplane. But this particular bird, we're going to go back again. We're going to go back. We've used the Wayback Machine, Greg, a couple of times in this. But first, I'm going to give you a plan view of the airplane. Greg can throw up a plan view. This has a full complement of weapon stores. We'll talk about that in a second. But this, the thinking on this airplane goes back to the familiar suspect we talked about last week, and that is Boyd with the Fighter Mafia, which we will not spend any more time on, but the Fighter Mafia was working on lightweight fighters, and that was all based on the information that we had in combat from the Russian MiGs. Smaller, more maneuverable airplanes, and what we were dealing with was Century Series aircraft, bigger airplanes, our aircraft, reliance on missiles, pilot buried in the fuselage, a lot of speed in level flight, but they were not terribly maneuverable. And the F-4 bore the brunt of what we were learning in air combat in Vietnam, and what was coming back was then fed into the next generation of these fighters. Now, Boyd and mathematician Thomas Christie were the ones that came up with that energy maneuverability theory. Remember, how much thrust, the wing area plays into it, that all works into a optimum thrust and wing area package that the aircraft can be the most effective at when it's in combat. Now, you have to remember that these aircraft were most effective in speeds of Mach 0.6 to Mach 1.6 at altitudes of 30 to 40,000 feet. So you aficionados at home, when you're looking at that dynamic that they came up with, that was the bandwidth, both in speed and altitude, that they thought these airplanes were going to be fighting at and how they could be most effective. Now, it does incorporate a lot of the things in a modern American fighter design. We talked about this cockpit. We'll get a little bit more into that, but 360-degree cockpit where the pilot can see all the way around. It does incorporate a gun. We've gone back to a gun, and then much more advanced missiles. But Christie and Boyd were the ones that fed heavily into this. Now, the problem for the folks developing the airplane was that ultimately became the YF-16 was the resistance to it within the Air Force. The Air Force, at the beginning of this, the brass did not want a lightweight fighter. They had no interest in it whatsoever. Remember, we were going to stick with that twin engine, more redundant, more reliability. An aircraft that the F-15 was flew at Mach 2.5, I think clocked out at Mach 2.5. They wanted a big, heavy fighter. They did not want what I would call this lightweight, bantamweight fighter that could get in and really duke it out and fight on a level playing field with these with their opponents, which were Warsaw Pact, either client state airplanes that were built under license. A lot of these MiGs were built under license with some of these Warsaw Pact allies, or the Soviet Union. Now, the thing you have to remember about Soviet fighter tactics as opposed to American fighter tactics was what, Greg? What was it? They were much more reliant on command and control, where American pilots were trained to be more aggressive singularly. So if you got into air combat, Soviet fighter forces were designed in a defensive nature, in rings around what they were trying to defend, with AAA and anti-aircraft missiles. And their pilots were basically, they would take off, they were vectored in to the incoming aircraft that they had on radar by ground control. But they were not trained with as much initiative as the American fighter pilots. So what that meant was that with these highly maneuverable airplanes, very, very advanced radars, that once the American airplanes got in, the pilots were essentially on their own and would make a lot of the combat decisions and fighting decisions, even up to the point of engaging. Soviet trained fighter pilots would actually ask for permission to engage, where the American pilots did not have that. If they were under orders to deal with an adversary, they called the ball in the air, which is not the case with Soviet pilots. But this aircraft was, when it was initially designed, not excited about within the United States Air Force until they flew it, Greg. And then when they flew it, they realized that they had a tremendous, tremendous aircraft and an advantage. Now, in a design scheme, what's different about this, Greg? What's different? You know, we talked about, let's go back. We talked about NACA testing wing areas and airfoils. This airplane is the first intentionally designed unstable aircraft that was ever designed and flown in the United States Air Force. Now, they did have, remember we talked about a lot of those Century Series fighters, we did have problems with unintentional design consequences. We talked about like the Sabre dance with an unstable wing and some of the issues with the F-102 and the F-106 program. But this aircraft was actually designed to be unstable. Now, what does that mean? That means that the aircraft was flown by computers and the computers would figure out what that's called fly-by-wire. So the idea behind a fly-by-wire system is there is a flight control computer in the airplane. The pilot is basically telling the airplane where he wants to go or what he wants to do with inputs with his stick, right, with his control stick. And the yoke is either, the control yoke is either between his legs or on the side. The F-16 is on the side. But the idea is that he's kind of saying, this is what I'd like to do. Now there's a computer, a fly-by-wire computer in there that basically says, okay, I am going to input into the controls the optimum control position in order to get him what he wants. If the airplane were left to its own devices when it's unstable, and it depends on the unstable airframe, a lot of them will pitch up. I believe this airplane, if it's left to its own devices, pitches up. I think it does. But the idea is that having that system and having an unstable airframe allows the aircraft pilot to do more maneuvers, and the airplane is more maneuverable than if you just had it where it was old hydraulic controls and you had to design it so it was totally stable. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but with these more and more unstable airframes with fly-by-wire, they were able to get more performance out of them. Now, what is probably the most prominent fly-by-wire airplane that you would say is in that family, or the one that is probably the most interesting? Which one do you think, Greg? The F-117. The F-117, those probes that are along the front, there's 4 flight control computers. By the way, Fred Fun Fact, which I have not done in a while, Fred Fun Fact, the flight control computers in the F-117 are derivatives from the F-16 flight controller, if you didn't know that. When we talk about the F-117, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the idea behind the flight control computer is that it gives you much more optimum performance in an interesting design. In other words, more maneuverability. The other thing that is interesting about the F-16 is that how it was constructed. It was designed to be built out of relatively common manufacturing techniques. A lot of aircraft these days are composite. They're designed by composite, carbon fiber and things of that nature. The F-16 is 80% aluminum, 8% steel, 3% composites, and 1.5% titanium, if you can believe that, Greg. So it's built out of relatively common compounds to make the airplane. The aircraft, we've talked a little bit about aircraft fatigue. This aircraft is designed to get out to, without a SLEP, a service life extension program, the airplane is designed to get out to about 8,000 hours in its service life. Now, what does that mean, Greg? Quite simply, if you fly it past that, and we're going to talk about the importance of service life extension and hours in a minute I am going to talk about one version of this airplane, but they were designed to get out to that. If you flew them past that, you run the risk of the structural frame starts to fall apart. It starts to crack, which is not good, Greg, because then what happens? The wing falls off, or the tail, or whatever, and that's a really bad day for a fighter pilot. So I'm going to put this down for a second because I'm going to move over. I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to move over to my stage 2. Now, my stage 2 today is a salute to all of those F-16 drivers. We did the F-15 drivers. We're going to do the F-16 drivers. Now, the one thing I will say, if you notice on this, Colonel Ross Miles was an F-16 driver. It is fitting that we are in the Miles hangar. Ross, we miss you very much. He was a fantastic pilot, a wonderful guy. I liked him very much, and we miss him. This aircraft, by the way, we're going to show you 2 F-16s in this video. This is a movie magic version of the airplane. This is like the F-15 that we had. The cockpit is fully functional, all the instruments. It's been in a number of films and movies, but this is another simulator. We do have, and what Greg's going to show you, is an F-16N out front. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So what we want to do today is salute all of those F-16 drivers, and we're going to do that. We're getting close to Easter. Greg has set me up, although I didn't get the hat, I did get the drink, the Easter drink. Greg, I really appreciate that. This is a Jones product. I think we've had Jones product before. This has got a lot of cane sugar in it, and it is pineapple cream soda. That's kind of an interesting one. We'll have to see. Oh, Greg's rubbing his belly. Let's see. Since 1996, 160 calories, so this is not the worst one. This is actually cold, so there might not be botulism in this one, as Greg keeps trying to get rid of me. But if you're an F-16 pilot and you flew, you could have been doing everything from flying combat cover in Europe in the Cold War. You could have been in any of the Iraqi operations or any of the Enduring Freedom operations. This airplane has flown all over the world and seen all kinds of combat. So if you're an F-16 driver, we salute you, we appreciate your service, and I want to say thank you. Cheers. Well, Greg, this hasn't been the worst. It hasn't been the best. It's kind of in the middle. It is passable. I will say that I don't feel like, being like a bunny and hopping on over to the emergency room. Do you like how I worked that in? Worked it in. But it's not bad, Greg. Not bad. So let's talk about the aircraft in context of today's battlefield. As I said, there are more and more blocks. This airplane, by the way, and Greg can throw up some of the flags of the partners that have been involved in it. There are a number of folks that have built this airplane under license or have operated the airplane as foreign sales that we have sold the airplane to. It has been in all major conflicts. If you look at this particular aircraft, it has both radar and heat-seeking missiles. It also carries iron bombs on it, which the F-16 more and more started doing as we weren't dealing with air superiority as much. The aircraft has done more and more strike missions, ground strike missions. The earlier block aircraft, if they're still in service, have been being used increasingly in that role. And then the air superiority portion, so trying to provide air cover, has gone more to F-22. That would be in the Syrian conflict and stuff like that. With the Russian aircraft and some of the later generation of Chinese aircraft that are flying today, this aircraft in its earlier state is just not survivable anymore in that space. And so what I'm talking about is like a MiG-31 and above. It is just not capable of surviving in that kind of a threat environment. And the Air Force anymore would have F-22s probably available. Not to say, and I'm not dissing the airplane at all, the airplane just has reached its point where it's just not as capable in the role it was originally designed as that little bantamweight fighter. It's just not capable anymore against some of these later designs, but it is still in use. The aircraft was out into production into 2017, and that's not to say that the line will not open again to produce more variants if they're ordered. So I wouldn't say that the sun has set on this. The only thing I would say about it is that these aircraft are being used a lot as drones. Those no-low, no-live operator drones where they're being flown by a remote control. They recently, a little while back, retired the F-4 fleet, and a lot of these F-16s are now providing drone missions on remote control, being shot down and used as radar testing equipment and all that other kind of stuff. So they are entering into the final phase of their life. So we promised you we're going to show you two aircraft today. Greg is going to go out and do some pickup shots of a very, very interesting F-16, and that is the F-16N. And the N model F-16 was used as an aggressor in the Navy Fighter Weapons School in Top Gun. They were flown extensively. Now, interesting thing about the F-16Ns, Greg, the Navy has, because they were flown so hard and so aggressively, the Navy has a lower threshold of hours, if you can believe that. So the F-16Ns, the one of which we have in our inventory, are first of all rare airplanes, and secondly, they have less flight hours than their American counterparts, and they were retired mandatorily by the Navy once they hit those because of the high G and the high G maneuvers that they were doing. But overall, I think we're going to see the F-16 in U.S. Air Force service all the way out to 2025. So that's exciting. But if you are going to be an F-16 aficionado, you need this exciting puzzle. Greg likes these puzzles. This is a F-16 Fighting Falcon puzzle. It can be had on our website. You go out and pick that up. What a great picture. That's a great picture. So the F-16, and of course, no puzzle outing would be complete unless you are building it in your corresponding F-16 shirt, Greg. This is that really nice fabric, the shirts we've got in. I really like that one. So go out to the website and pick up one of those shirts. So that wraps up our overview of the F-16 today in our inventory. Go out and subscribe on our YouTube channel. Like us on YouTube. Like us on Facebook. Remember, we cannot do these restorations without your donation. So please go out to the website and make a donation. My name is Fred Bell. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. Thank you very much. Have a great day.